Welcome to the Business Concern podcast. My name is Rick Rebusel, and I'm the Principal Consultant of Business Transition Consulting. My guest today is Jim Karrh. Jim helps organizations turn their everyday business messaging into a consistent business advantage. The topic for today is how does the private business manage its message? I'm a business consultant, and my expertise is in helping private business owners document their planning. My blog is Owning a Business at owneragreement.com, and the Business Transition Consulting website is btcllc.net. My website on managing for value is priordiligence.com, and I have two books available on Amazon. Now What? The Practical Guide for Getting Maximum Value from a Business, and Implementing the Buy-Sell Agreement, an introduction to the implementation process which creates wealth for you and your heirs. Welcome, Jim, and thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Rick. It's a pleasure to be with you and a pleasure to be with an audience of people who are running businesses and growing businesses and thinking about how to get the most value from their businesses.
Well, the orientation of the podcast is to private business owners, so that's our audience, and I know what you have to say will be of a great deal of interest to them. I want to start by mentioning your book, The Science of Customer Connections, Manage Your Message to Grow Your Business. Tell us a little bit about the book.
Well, the book it draws upon my, shall we say, Rick, varied experiences over the course of a career and brings them together for, I think, a chronic and very expensive problem that a lot of your listeners probably feel in their guts, and they may even feel it on the balance sheet as well. So the book comes in bringing together several components. One is how to create a meaningful, resonant, clear, brief message, one you can have in just everyday conversation, in business conversations. And that comes from my background as a PhD type. I was a university professor, consumer researcher, and studied a lot about buyer psychology, continue to study that today. The other part is, and I think we can, of course, Rick, go into some different areas of more detail, but when I speak with and work with private business owners, one of the things that I hear a lot is so much comes on them. They are to be the carriers of the message. They're the ones who are responsible either primarily or sometimes completely for building the relationships, building the reputation, sometimes closing the deals. And that's hard to scale that way. What you really need is a bigger base of other people who can carry the message, the people I call the messengers. And so that comes from a lot of my teaching background, but also my training and learning background. I've come from more than a decade now of training professionals in terms of better messaging. And the third piece we can talk about a lot, which I think will really hit home, is management habits. So how do you, once you've found a message and you build your base, your relationship of people who can carry that message, how do you get some consistency in it? So how do you make sure that your stories stay fresh? How do you make sure that this is something that it isn't just a one-off kind of effort, but it's something that becomes a permanent part of your organization in the way that you go about engaging the marketplace and building the value of your business. So I have some background. I was the chief marketing officer of a mid-sized private firm for a little more than 4 years, and we had some success there. It wasn't always, we didn't do everything great, and there's a lot of messiness, obviously, when you get to the relationship from marketing to sales, and we sold to independent distributors, and just how do you make this all come to life consistently? But taken together, the book and my efforts these days, Rick, is in bringing those three elements together, is helping business people, owners and teams and companies get a marketplace conversational message, build your base of messengers, and then get the management habits to keep it all consistent and growing over time.
Jim, one thing I like to do always is ask people what their hometown is. A lot of times we talk about educational backgrounds, but I always like to know where people came from. So what's your hometown?
And that hometown, that is by the way, first of all, it's a great conversation starter. I've talked to people who are expert networkers, and oftentimes people, who may even be among your listeners, or is kind of uncomfortable getting to know people. Sometimes they like those relationships, but it's hard to know what to start with, other than oh, so what do you do for a living? But finding out, that's always a good thing. What's home for you? What was your hometown like? Is always a great starter, and I think it has a big effect on how we see the world. And so mine is a little town in Georgia, the southern half of Georgia. It's called Swainsboro. My father was a pine tree farmer, and my mother she helped raise my brother and me, but she was a shop owner, had a clothing shop right off the courthouse square. So it was a very traditional small town upbringing. People tended to know one another. And look out for one another and gossip about one another and all of that in that small town way. I'm proud of my hometown. I have it. It's been a long time since I've lived there, but still have a lot of connection and things that we're trying to do in helping that hometown as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. People will almost always attribute some of their traits and characteristics to where they grew up and those experiences. And I also had a small town experience. So I do think that in a small town, you do get to see the communication aspect. You get to see how quickly people get to know about one another and what the medium is for that knowledge, and it's a very interesting thing. I suppose you get the same thing on a city block or something like that, but I don't have that background, so I can relate to your small town experience.
There are a lot of elements of that come into the present day, and both in our media environment, our communications environment, and whatever background your listeners come from. So you're right. There are a few things just I'll sprinkle in that we've come to learn. When it comes to one's network, psychologists tend to say that, kind of no matter what, whether you come from a big town or a small town or whatever the size of your network of relationships might be, there's probably somewhere between 100 to 150 are the ones that any of us can kind of actively keep up with. And there'll be a handful that'll be your really close friends, really close connections as well. So you're right, Rick. If you might have grown up in an urban background and your community might have been your city block, or it might have been a couple of blocks plus people you went to church with or played sports with or involved in other activities. So the other thing is I learned early on that people talk. And certainly in this day when it's not just the analog part, it's the digital talking that goes on as well through social media and all of the like. So when it applied to your business, just remember, people talk. And so what we want is some mechanisms so that you're part of the conversations that you want to be part of, and that you're being talked about, if not perfectly well, because we don't have to be perfect, thank goodness, but that you're being talked about in a consistently positive way, which is natural, but also can help you with your business or whatever causes that you're passionate about as well.
I think from what I've seen with people, let's call it reputational knowledge, much of that has to do with the sincerity of the message. People have well, a lot of people call it a BS factor, but whatever it is, people have a judgment. They're able to sort of get a sense of when they're being kind or when it's too slick or it's too pre-prepared. And they also rely on the reputational experience. If their neighbor tried something and it worked, then that means more than hearing it on a commercial. And those aspects of, well, I guess we can call it trust, sincerity, genuineness. Those tend to be the things that stick with people and move them, tend to get them to do something.
Agreed, Rick. And just in that, you've touched upon several issues, and we can again dig into these a bit more if you wish. There's so much there in what you said, a lot of truism. So just in there, you talked about trust. We can talk about that, of what trustworthiness really means from a psychological standpoint and from a business standpoint, because those things are intertwined. You talked about kind of the BS factor, right? And how people these days, I think even more than ever, are, whether you use the term authenticity or being real or genuine, how important that is. Because in some ways, people can check up on you in ways that they couldn't before. If you make claims or you say things with a swipe of a finger across a mobile device, they can check you out. And there's been over time, people are more skeptical, less trusting, whether that be of people, businesses, institutions of all sizes. One of the things that I cite in the book, in that if you want to maintain your reputation and build your reputation and your trustworthiness, it is through conversations, people to people, peer to peer, that is going to be the most fertile ground. Because people are more skeptical of promotional pitches, of scripts, or things that they feel like they're being led someplace that they frankly don't want to go. So that is in many ways, Rick, it's the importance of treating those everyday business conversations and treating those relationships as a tremendous opportunity and a manageable business problem. There are forces that pull us in a direction where we don't want to go. And it's, a lot of it is the way that our brains are wired. So one of the things when you're talking about the BS factor, right, there is, and oftentimes even very good professionals and even very passionate, capable business owners and leaders can get pulled in a bad direction. Simply even the wiring of our brains, Rick, we are drawn to those things that we are passionate about and that we're comfortable with. And so our brains actually reward us for talking about ourselves. The parts of our brain light up when we talk about ourselves. It's the same part of our brain if we have a great meal or we're thinking about something that's pleasurable. So we get drawn that way even when our intentions may be on our customers, on our marketplace, put the customer first. And so we can inadvertently, Rick, be a little too passionate, a little too self-promotional, just because our companies, ourselves, our interests, our expertise is what we know best. And that's what we tend to talk about. So you've got to have some discipline and some intention about making sure that the core of your message for your business is not about you. It's a strange thing, you think about, oh, well, but I really know what I'm doing. My expertise applies. I have great offerings, and I'm sure you do. But that BS factor, that's natural skepticism, our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter all the time. So to be able to break through that noise, there is a discipline about making sure that the core of your message is about the problems that you help other people solve, the ways that you can help them in their lives. And that, again, takes some discipline because it's counter to the way that our very brains are wired. We all can fall into that trap.
Jim, in order to figure that out, in order to understand what our customers and our clients want or what we've done for them that's beneficial, many times we have to not talk so much and listen quite a bit.
Listening is a very underrated, underpracticed skill, is it not? And so, yes, and in the sense of active listening, I've had it described to me very well, and like most people, I can remember a concept and can't always remember the proper attribution. So, someone out there in my network, someone very smart who said it along these lines, that oftentimes, whether you think of a sales conversation or some other business conversation, that most of us are listening, thinking about how we're going to respond. In other words, think of like a mountain lion or a panther waiting to pounce. So the first time that there's some particular word or a question or objection or something that comes up, we can tend to be drawn to like, let me jump in and then tell you how great we are. Let me tell you how I can solve your problem right now. And again, I think oftentimes, Rick, it's well-intentioned. People know they have a good offering. They want to solve problems. They want to grow their business and they want to help other people. But active listening is something that also takes practice. And whether you're doing that in your business, if the leader is helping other people know how to do it, you bring in experts, you practice, you role play, you coach within your business, it takes some doing, because again, that's not how we are naturally wired. But being able to let the other person unpack a little bit. Let them talk about their problems, frustrations, their aspirations in their own language, and then be able to share stories, come in with some working hypotheses, but just let the other person talk a little bit about oftentimes, how they frame the problem, what they've tried in the past, what's worked and what hasn't worked. What is it that they're maybe afraid of doing, or what causes them stress in terms of addressing that problem? So it can be, hey, we've invested in that sort of technology or that sort of program before, it didn't work. And so rather than jumping in and saying, well, here's why we're great. Let me tell you that the 8 primary features and the value prop of what we offer, it's more of, well, talk about how that worked, your team, where you're setting your priorities, where you want to go. And here's one other point I'll bring into this, Rick. And this is something that I've learned just in recent years from research. This came from someone named Todd Capone. He used to run a business that would take online reviews for a company and bring them into their website. Right. So if you had people who were rating your business out there on other third-party sites, you want to be able to bring those into your website. And in the course of that, through tens of thousands of reviews, he learned something that was, I thought, very important. Is that the highest conversions, and conversion meaning an opportunity into a sale, the highest conversions aren't for companies or brands or products with perfect ratings all the way through. Going back to your BS meter, Rick, if you saw especially like a professional service or a higher end business, and there were 100 reviews out there and they were all perfect 5s, on a 5 scale, would there be anything on your BS meter that might start to peg out a little bit?
Sure.
You think maybe maybe these are some robots that are out there making the ratings, or somehow they're kind of gaming the system, because nothing's perfect, right? What Todd and his firm found out is that the highest conversions on that 1 to 5 scale are for companies and products that have an average rating of between 4.2 and 4.5, which is very solid, but it also means that it's not perfect for everybody. And there's a level of authenticity, there's a level of truth into that. And so that's another thing that I would say to your listeners is, like, your business isn't perfect for everyone. There are clients and customers that are a pain in the rear, that drain resources, that won't implement well, that aren't set up for what you would do. And so having a clear sense of that, of who is an ideal customer or a best fit client for you, and making sure that that is something that's well understood within your company. You might be surprised, I actually might be a little frustrated that on balance, Rick, when I work with leaders, they would say, not only do our people not really get our value proposition or our mission or vision, but there's just not an innate sense of whom we serve best, who's a great customer. And we might want to serve everyone, but clearly there's a best fit that's there. And so those sorts of things, is in terms of shared knowledge, I will often lead clients into developing a common guide or playbook a source of truth, so that we have a good sense of not only our message, but also from a customer standpoint, what are the kind of frustrations and problems that they deal with, who's an ideal best fit for our business, and then let's orient our conversations and orient our marketing around those types of people.
Jim, let me ask you, in going back to listening for a second, you mentioned active listening. Now, I understand that to mean, and I'll tell you a funny story about this, but I understand that to mean that you have the capability of after listening to somebody, you can actually repeat back to them in your words what they said. And to me, that's what active listening is. I was part of an experiment one time in a class situation where we had to go through a interview with someone, and the only thing that we could do is repeat back what they had already said to us. And the people that were interviewing us then were rating us on the basis of how well we did in the interview. And half the group did active listening, and half the group talked about themselves. And that was their assignment. And the interviewers were college kids that were just given a bunch of questions and asked to rate. And of the group that did affirmative listening, that was repeating back to the person what they were saying or asking, they got very much higher scores than the people who answered the question, which is kind of interesting. Often, if you've listened well enough to be able to repeat back what somebody said, for them, you've demonstrated an incredible amount of intelligence.
What an interesting story. And I think that there are lessons there on both sides of that equation. And I'll say, Rick, there are other people who will talk very tactically about how you build rapport and how you show your understanding. And they'll talk about eye contact and leaning forward and nodding your head and all of those sorts of things. And there's value in it. But I think what you talked about shows it's more profound on both sides of the equation. So for both the speaker and the listener. So when you talk about active listening and being able to take what you talked about and repeat it back, but using my own language, for me, it helps me as the listener to internalize it and actually learn from it. On a related note, one of the little snippets of research that I have in the book, interestingly enough, in a classroom environment, and there were studies of note-taking and note-taking behavior. So, these days, a lot of people, when they're actually meeting in class in person, are using a laptop or a pad to take notes. And you can hear just the clicking, as they're typing along, like they're a court reporter, taking down everything that the professor is saying. And they compared that to those whose note-taking style was in actually writing it down physically on a piece of paper, and how the subsequent performance was on exams. And so what you find, and this is a truism from the experiment that you talked about and how it plays out in real life, is that you can't take notes as quickly if you're writing it by hand as if you were typing on a keyboard, of course. So it forces you to summarize, internalize, put it kind of in your own words and not just simply record in the exact same language as the professor. Those students did much better on exams because it forces a better learning. The other side of the equation of what you were talking about, Rick, is from the speaker's perspective. So if you are reflecting back to me things that as you're trying to gain understanding of my perspective but in your words, that demonstrates to me, even better than eye contact and nodding your head, that you, at least in the moment, you get it, right? You are paying attention to me and you're demonstrating empathy. This is, and if I may, Rick, come around to something that we mentioned at the beginning of our conversation. I think this is very true for business professionals and business owners. Everyone that I talk to, client, friend, whomever, at some at some level, they have a goal to be a trusted advisor, to be trustworthy, to be consultative for them and the people on their team. Trustworthiness in this environment, it's really hard to come by, isn't it? And so what I find is that there's a shorthand that we can follow if you want to build and maintain an extra level of trustworthiness. I find that a lot of professionals and a lot of companies tend to get the balance off a little bit. So think of it very simply this way. Your trustworthiness is a balance of two factors. The first is your expertise, right? Your authority. It's the stuff you know, the experience that you have, your credentials, your background in working with other customers and clients, the very objective kinds of things, the stuff you can put on a website or on a LinkedIn profile. But here's the other half of the equation that's more squishy, it's more difficult, but equally as important, and that is your empathy. Not sympathy, but empathy. And empathy is your ability to demonstrate that understanding of the other person's situation, whether it's a customer for your business or a prospect or someone who might even buy your business. It's understanding and being able to reflect back to them. And that's how you generate win-win opportunities. And that is really only through conversation and having a consistent mastery of conversation that you can demonstrate empathy. You can say all the things you want about, hey, we take care of our communities, we serve other people. Yes, yes. And that's a great intention. But I find it's really only through conversation, the ability to share stories, listen, ask good questions, and make this a balance is how you can get the other half of the equation in there. And these days, that empathy and that trustworthiness is more important than ever.
Jim, many of the situations I get in have to do with owners who are trying to, well, at the beginning, try to understand one another, and then thereafter try to plan together or make an agreement together. And one of the things that I ask them to do that some have the skill and some don't, but almost everyone can develop the skill, is to articulate their values. And by values, I'm not talking about whether they're loyal or honest or, have some moral quality. But the value that needs to be expressed has to do with the relevance of how they interact with the business. And it could be as simple as, I never want to do anything other than be in this business, or I want my son to run this business, or I want to make as much money as possible, and that's that. But what I find is that there's a certain high percentage of owners that are incapable of articulating that. They haven't done the work to think about it. They haven't talked to their spouses and family about what they think, which will certainly influence what they think and do. And not having done that work, they don't have the capability. If you say to them, what are your values with respect to the business? They look at you like you just said something that was totally in a foreign language. But as they work at it, you'll find that 6 months later, you can say, what is your value of the business? What's important to you about this business? And they'll say it to you in 10 seconds. Because now that they've thought about it, it's something they can express. And when the other owners hear it, and if you've done that work, then not only is there the sincerity, because it's obviously been thought about and been something expressed that's very important, but then you get to hear it from the other owners too. And that empathy you're talking about, it's a two-way street. You have to have the sincerity and the forethought, and then you have to have the empathy to receive it. Because after all, the business is the communication between two people.
It is. And I suspect what you're talking about, Rick, are things that are stuck in our heads and stuck in our guts. And maybe we just haven't addressed them with that sort of direct question. I'm curious, do you have certain exercises or certain kinds of questions or certain iterations when you have to put your therapist coach hat on?
I try to
What
stay
helps
away
bring
from
that?
that.
Because you talked about a progression, and oftentimes, listen, just on the messaging uh, around a business, and I want to come back around to your example, but just what happens oftentimes is people they have their assumptions and they have the things that they know and they have their habits, but they haven't really as a team come together and try to clear out the underbrush, put our assumptions on the table and get real clear about what we want to say and how we want people to talk about the business. Oftentimes we'll get people together and there's somebody from sales and marketing and product and delivery and channel partners and maybe really good customers or clients and coming together from very different perspectives. And that's never happened before. And so there's a level of understanding, and we think sometimes we didn't understand the different perspectives. We didn't have very good data. We were making assumptions that weren't true or making trade-offs we didn't have to. So sometimes just addressing that in a facilitated way or a structured way the light bulbs go on all over the place and things become much more clear. So in the example that you gave, Rick, I'm curious as to, is there a process of getting clarity, or you often find that it's simply because a lot of these leaders or business owners haven't really thought of it in those terms
I think
that it begins, the light bulbs come on for them.
Yeah, I think what happens is that it's not that they haven't thought about it. It's just that they haven't communicated it and subjected it to somebody else's analysis. So we're often very much afraid of expressing what we really think because we're worried about what somebody else will say. And with a group of business policymakers and owners, if they don't get past that, if they can't speak directly to one another about what they think, they will not agree. They will not plan together. They may make statements to one another, but there won't be anything other than just plots and subplots and maneuvers and all that. But in a truly outstanding business, in a business that does progress, in a business that does do exciting things and does plan, you'll go back and find that those policymakers were people who were able to be fairly blunt with one another and candid with one another. And it's at the level of, I want to make as much money as possible and get out of this. Or, my son needs to run this business and he's going to run this business. That's how it's going to work. And that means everything to me. Or it may mean that somebody just simply wants to do this work for the rest of their life. If they're a professional, like a lawyer, an engineer, accountant, maybe that's just what they want to do and they want to put themselves in a position to be able to do it. Well, they may not want to say that to their partners. They may not want to say that to the other people that make policy. But those people will actually know anyway. They'll know from the person's actions and all that. So if they continue trying to maneuver and not be candid, then that just goes on and on and on and eventually leads to some disruption and the breaking up of the group. But even with diverse interests, I find that if they are candid with one another and develop that ability to express their values to the business, which, by the way, change from time to time. But if they can do that, if they develop that skill, all of a sudden, they find an alignment, even though their motives are different, and they find that they can make one another better, and then the planning begins. So that's the power of being able to articulate your values. And the exercises that I have people do just has to do with what you've been talking about. How can you be sincere? How can you say something to your partner that makes your partner trust you rather than wonder what you're really up to? So those things are the things that we kind of try to work on in terms of, I try to get people just to talk to one another. And when things are said that don't really make sense, that don't pass the BS factor, get called on it and not tell one another what they want to hear. And those human things, as you mentioned, the stuff that makes you feel good, talking about yourself, telling people what you think they want to hear so they're really impressed with you, those are the things that really undermine our efforts in the long run.
And we're talking about things that may be your personal message, but they're also intertwined with the business message, of course, and they get to our very identity oftentimes. And Rick, I'll find oftentimes we worry so much about those conversations. This has been true for me. I find out that oftentimes it's just needless worry, and of being a little bit more, what you want to call it, vulnerable, a little bit more open about your priorities and your aspirations and your anxieties. But often, most of the time, I find when you have those conversations, a lot of the worry goes away. It's a lot easier than you might have thought. And so it might be some of the examples that you just mentioned. So it might be someone who's an attorney or a accomplished professional services person, and maybe even their name has been on the door for a long time, and they may say, I'm just really, if I'm not involved in this business, even after I sell it or sell a portion of it, I don't know what I do. I don't want to play golf every day. And I would suspect that people who would know that person well might say, wow, that's the most stunning thing I've heard since I learned that air contains oxygen. We all know that about you. And so it's just great to hear you say it. And then we can just have that on the table and figure out what's the right role for everyone. And so whether it's succession planning, or maybe, someone might say, well, I hired somebody 18 months ago and I really feel a commitment to them. I told them that, they'd have at least a 3 to 5 year path here in the business, and then we'd evaluate and that sort of thing. I don't want to see that person go. I don't want to break a promise, or I'm worried about how someone who might have, who comes into a role and they may have great financial and operational skills, but not good people skills. We've got to figure out how to make that work. Just by saying those things out loud with people whom you trust and you can approach the issue with. Again, I just tend to find, whether it been in my experience and what I've seen play out with a lot of other executives and business owners, is there's a lot more worry and stress from not having the conversation than when that conversation's done and you can actually address it and people go, wish I'd done that sooner, but now let's get to work.
Well, Jim, let me ask you, from my personal experience, I know how difficult it is to just figure out what you're about and what to say to people. And I think that's maybe one of the things that you help people with. I think that when you're approaching the marketplace and you're trying to tell people what you do, at least in my case, I tend to give them too many things. I tend to mix the message a little bit, and I'll say, well, I do this, but then I really don't do that all the time. And then sometimes I do this, and I can't, the elevator message gets muddled, and pretty soon it's a 10-minute monologue. How do you deal with that problem?
The way that I tend to deal with it, and whether it's an individual or oftentimes a team or a business, is to break it down into small modular elements. And you probably, Rick, what you were talking about is the common problem, is people know too much and they have a lot of things that they do. And if you'll look all the way from, collateral material or what's on their website, they probably have, here are 15 reasons to do business with us. Here's the 12 parts of our mission statement and our commitments and our experiences, and there are 100 logos on the website. There's too much stuff. It's like going into your attic or your basement after a while. How did we accumulate all this? What do we really need? And the fact is, we can't remember all of those things. And so how can we convey them? And they also tend to be kind of focused on us. So it's a simple, it's called the rule of threes. It's not really a rule, but it is a guideline, and it's based in good psychology. We tend to be able to remember and articulate things in groups of three. So oftentimes if we're trying to unpack someone's business message, we'll look at and say, as we were talking earlier about, who's an ideal customer for us? Who's a client? Whom do we serve really well? and may think of the characteristics of them and break it down into a short list that can be articulated. Think about there are probably 2 or 3 different kinds of buyers, whether you're selling to other businesses or you're selling to individuals in certain roles, or maybe 3 top problems that you help your customers or clients solve. There may be, we'll try to get 3 things that make you truly different, if not completely unique, but make you pretty much different than competitors or someone trying to do this themselves. So getting it down, and that's where a lot of the hard work comes in, Rick, is, well, wait a minute, but we have 15 great things about us. You mean we want to get it down to 3? And say, well, probably a lot of them are overlapping, right? But yes, you can't, if you try to give people 15 reasons to do something, you lose them after the 3rd one anyway. They can't make sense of it. So we're not trying to recite the preamble to the U.S. Constitution here. We're trying to get a few themes that people can remember in the moment and can be remembered by other people from conversation. You know, how common is it, Rick, that you're, whether it be at a networking event or a presentation or a hallway conversation or a tailgate conversation, and you think later on, I wish I had shared that story, or I wish I'd said something a little bit different. So we need to, it's of no use after the moment has passed. So the key I find is to force a little bit of discipline just around the things that people can remember in the moment, and that they can be remembered and then later shared among your community of messengers.
Jim, isn't it a delicate balance? So I remember an old joke I heard at a sales type of a meeting where people were talking about how to be a good salesman, how to present yourself. And the story is that there's a car salesman working at a Ford dealership, and customer comes on the lot, says, I'm looking for a brand new Chevy Impala. And the salesman says, I can help you with that. Well, you know, the gist of the story is that the essence is the salesman can help no matter what. The answer is always yes. You know, so if you can get the customer to say what the problem is, your answer is, I can help you with that. There is a certain kind of dishonesty with that. At the same time, many times in the business environment, what we're saying to customers is I can help. And what we're asking the customer to do is tell us their problem so we can say, I can help. So is it backwards? Are we, by trying to develop the 3 messages we want to say, shouldn't we really be asking the customer what their problem is and saying, I can help you? Or how do you deal with that conundrum?
Yeah, I think those things go together. And when you're talking about the Chevy Impala example, that's a really good one. And when you talk about the nature of selling and buying today, is there any industry compared to the car selling world that has been more impacted by technology, or how buyers can be smarter? They don't have to interact very much at all in person anymore. You can buy a car in 15 minutes right now from your computer. So I would say in that sense, knowing that buyers have more information, sellers don't have any monopoly over information anymore. In fact, oftentimes sellers are at an information disadvantage to buyers, which has not been the case until recent years. You know, it would be one of those things where that car dealership, if you get the fundamentals of what it is that they serve, I mean, yes, they sell vehicles, but what kind of problems do they solve? Well, they solve, you know, convenience, and they solve safety, and they help families do more things together and get it at that level. So in that instance, I might say the question would be, if Rick comes onto my lot and says, I want a Chevy Impala, I might just say, what led you to prefer an Impala? what kind of driving do you do? Who else is involved? Or are you concerned about cost and gas mileage and safety and how it looks and how it feels and drive performance and let go that way? It might be that an Impala is exactly what they want and they're just there to beat you up on price. It might be that there's some other they may have a child on the way and they might need a minivan, and the buyer coming in is like, I never imagined myself being a minivan person, but who knows? So what you do want to do is ask good questions and not just immediately jump into it's a mantra that I've tried to follow, Rick, is diagnosis before prescription. And especially when you get into dealing with, I'm sure you do often, is people who run businesses that have high value services, they have high value products, they deliver a lot of value, but there are a lot of things that go into the evaluation of that. So asking good questions is part of the diagnosis. Doing a little discovery is part of that. Prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. So let's try not to jump into the answer to the question too quickly.
Yeah, and it's a difficult thing. When people will ask you first, what do you do? And you can't answer, well, what do you want me to do?
Right.
You have to say something. And you have to say something that opens the conversation, not closes it.
You are fundamentally in your business. You are not someone coming in to fix them. Ride in on your proud white steed and come to the rescue with your superhero costume on. It is, even though you might have some business superpowers, as I've heard it expressed by Donald Miller and some others, chances are in your business, you are a guide. You're less Luke Skywalker and more Yoda, right? You're helping a client or a customer arrive at someplace they want to go and helping them make sense of the information and the constraints they have in the moment. And so if you appreciate that role, and Rick, in what you do, I can imagine no better metaphor than a guide of trying to help people get the most value out of their business, make difficult transitions, which have financial, emotional, and all sorts of different implications for people in their lives and their very identity, of someone to walk them through that. And based upon your experience of dealing with people who have not exactly the same situation, because everyone's a little bit different, but similar situations, and being able to help people through the roadblocks, the worries, the anxieties, the opportunities, at all different levels, that's your role. And so maybe I would suggest to your listeners, you think about it from a standpoint of, if you're a really good guide, what kinds of people, what kinds of organizations are really good for you to guide, who need your type of advice, need your type of product or service, and where are they trying to go? So I might talk about what I do is I help people learn how to talk about their business more effectively and build more trust, build more opportunities for growth, and then be able to get other people to do the same so that they scale their message for growth. And then there are all different ways that we can talk about the tactics of how that happens. But to come back around to that, it is, I think if you think about your skills, your experience, your expertise, as we talked about earlier, and if you're a really good guide, if you're a really good person to help lead that potential client, that potential customer into where they want to go in their situation, asking good questions, telling stories, making recommendations, and knowing that everyone's not a perfect fit. Sometimes it might be refreshing. I would think if you say, I might not be the best answer for you, but I can certainly make a recommendation of somebody else who might be a better fit. And oftentimes I think the prospect on the other side, rather than being offended, well, wait a minute. What do you mean I may not be the right fit for you? Come on, Rick, help me out. So thinking through that way, again, diagnosis, a little discovery, asking some good questions, and recognizing that there are types of customers and clients that you can help to get to somewhere important and help them along the way.
I think one of the things that it sounds like we agree about is that I approach a business as a monumental achievement. If you have a profitable business, you have my complete respect. It's not easy. And if that business has been there any length of time, it's been very, very difficult. It always is. And there's always a story, and there's always the hardships that have been involved. And so when I approach a profitable business, I approach it with tremendous respect. Somebody did something here, employed people, had conversations, did things right. But does it mean that they're where they want to be? Does it mean that this is what they want to do? And those are the things that you maybe can provide some help with. But I always use the example of a vending machine. And I just say, I'm not a vending machine. You don't put the money in the slot, press the button, and get the answer. So I don't have it. I don't have an inventory. What I can do is help you find your answer. I'm a resource, but I'm not the candy bar in the tray. So that's how I function. I mean, I come in and it's almost irrelevant. Could I run this business? I have no idea. I'm not going to. Can I provide all the answers? Absolutely not. Can I do this without the present management? No way. So all that goes away. It then becomes a question of what resource can I provide to make this business better? And that's how I look at it.
That's well said. And as one of the great, and been a mentor of mine, and one of the great, probably the most successful independent consultant in history is a person named Alan Weiss. And Alan has said, I never assume that I'm going to fix a client. And because that is pretentious, that's arrogant on your part, like that they need fixing. But at the same time, you don't want to be a vendor. You're not a vending machine. So I think the best business relationships this way are based on mutual respect and a peer or a partner mentality. So certainly you are providing value. But again, I think that the concept of that you're not the best fit for everyone, and not everyone is in the same position. There may be some people that look, I just want to cash out, or I want to do this, or I want to do that. And you might say, that's great. Have at it. But in terms of the nature of the coaching and the guidance that I can provide, I might not be your best person. And the ability to understand very fully what your value is and the kind of work that you want to do. I think it's very empowering, and actually it's very clarifying. And as we were talking earlier, Rick, about sometimes being able to just lay it out on the table and have a conversation becomes not anxiety producing, it's anxiety relieving. And it gives a great sense of how you can talk about yourself and the kind of business that you want to do going forward.
Once you develop this message, though, Jim, how do you get an organization to put the message out and be consistent about it? That seems to me to be a tremendous. But you get this great think tank together. You get your policy people together. You actually figure out what you're about. And then you've got all these other people that have to carry the message and get it right. How do you get that done?
That is the oftentimes the sticking point. And so if I talked about this three-legged stool of effective messaging, you got messengers, and then the final leg of the stool is management, really management habits. And so the first thing that we, in order to address that very problem, is I want everybody to recognize and state explicitly, what is the business value that we're trying to create here? Why is it important that we do this? We need to attach all of our efforts to a compelling business problem. So it might be that you're not selling a full portfolio to your existing customers. It might be that there's been a change in the environment that you have to react to. Maybe you need net new business. The growth has been hard. Whatever that thing is, So this isn't just, it can't be the flavor of the month. Oh no, the boss went to a conference or listened to a webinar, and so now we have to put up with this for the next 90 days. No, it needs to be something that is compelling, and that will keep everybody on board. And once we've come together with that message and we've identified the conversations to have, we really do need to keep it refreshed. And so I would say, if you approach this not as some promotional mindset, not like, hey, we're going to get everybody together and rewrite our mission statement. I have my own point of view about mission statements. I think they're a very, very limited value in terms of a marketplace message. But we want to bake this in. So if we have this way that we want to talk about the business, then when new people come into the business, they need to be onboarded with that. When people go from being a worker bee to having direct reports, their frontline manager, they need to have coaching skills around that message as well, modeling it well, coaching other people in how to do it, encouraging people. We just the way that we work and meet and operate as a business needs to always have these elements. And there needs to be some ownership with the client, with the company, about we're going to keep it refreshed. So whether you want to put it on the calendar, say every 6 months or 12 months, maybe the stories that we told last year aren't as relevant this year. I mean, our value proposition may be the same, but the ways that we express it and the examples that we share might need some updating. And so as the conversations themselves change. So Rick, you're right. It's going to live or die by whether this keeps a priority. We attach it to important things that have to happen for the business, and that we have people actively involved in refreshing it, getting feedback from the marketplace, and making sure that the right behavior is modeled from the top and also coached, because people will say, that all sounds great. I'm not quite sure how to do it. I need to gain confidence as I go along. So that's how it happens in practice.
Well, it's a necessary thing, I think, for businesses to be able to communicate in an effective way, and you obviously help them to do that. I want to ask you about one more thing: the Vascular Anomalies Center of Excellence. Tell me a little bit about that. I saw that on your website.
Sure, and that's on. I'll just say that's a part of my LinkedIn profile as well, and so I would invite your listeners to connect with me there, and if I can be a sounding board, or if they can gain some other ideas, a lot of resources for you there. It's one of the causes that's important to me. So I think this, Rick, when I work with other business leaders and business owners, it's very, very rare that it's all about business. They have family concerns, they have community concerns, they have causes and passions that are important. Oftentimes they use their business as fuel to say, if I do well here, then I can lend expertise and money and contacts and involvement into other things that matter a lot. I have a few of those myself. The Vascular Anomalies Center of Excellence at Arkansas Children's Hospital is just one of them. So I had a family member, a niece of mine, who had one of these. It's a medical issue, and there's this center here that's local here in my hometown of Little Rock that has really world-class expertise, and they treat young people and some adults from all over the world. She got some great guidance and advice. And in fact, she just graduated from high school and she is gorgeous. And so we're excited about that. And so that's another thing. I just bring it back around, Rick. The better that you can express the value of your business and get that consistent, the more that you'll develop, and not just for the business. You can gain more revenue, more relationships, more energy. And I'm sure that there are, for your listeners, they could name 2, 3, 4, 5 different things, causes and people in their community that they would want to support. It's another reason to get a handle on this and grow, because your dollars and your expertise and your passion can be applied in lots of different ways.
Well said. Well said. Well, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed speaking with you, and appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Mike, I appreciate that. And again, between my website, LinkedIn, I have a podcast of all things called the Manage Your Message Podcast. So a lot of free resources and a lot of areas where if if I can be a good sounding board or a source of ideas and some guidance for your listeners, I'd be really pleased to do that. Because like you, I look at people who have businesses and are running them as these are people of accomplishment who have overcome things, who have still big dreams. And I just think that that's worth supporting and worth doing.
I thank everybody for listening, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time on the Business Concern Podcast.